welcome to another edition of Surgeons Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Nat Soper. Nat is currently the chair of surgery at the University of Arizona in Phoenix at Banner Health, and he's been there for coming up to 5 years now. Prior to that, he was the chair of surgery and the head of the department at Northwestern University in Chicago. And prior to that, he'd been in WashU and spent some time at the Mayo Clinic as an NIH fellow. He's probably best known for being one of the fathers of minimally invasive surgery, laparoscopy, if you like, and as an upper GI and general surgeon, he was there at the very beginning. He's, as you just heard, has moved from one part of the country to the next, and I'm certainly looking forward to hear what he has to say about transitions in lifestyle and changes in career. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and send us comments. But without further ado, let's jump across and hear what our friend Nat Soper has to say. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons Lives.
Hey, John.
Hey, Nat, how are you?
Never better.
Well, we'll take it.
How are things out east?
They're pretty good, thank you. Yeah, it's a pretty reasonable day, and just popped home to listen to the pearls of wisdom and the life lessons, and
Oh, yes, absolutely. I've got it all solved.
exactly. So I don't know. First of all, I should thank you for taking some time out of your day to come and talk nonsense to me today. I don't know whether you've seen any of the previous interviews, but basically, what I'm interested in is showing to people that surgeons have a bit more to them than just 2 more papers and 3 more gallbladders. So hence the subtitle of Stuff That Matters. But maybe we could start, as I usually do, by asking you to tell folks a little bit about Nat Soper, starting with the words, I was born in.
Okay. So I was born in Iowa City, Iowa. My dad was an academic pediatric surgeon at the University of Iowa, one of the first fellowship-trained pediatric surgeons in the States. And in fact, when I was 5, we went to Liverpool, England, so that he could do that fellowship at the St. Ormsby Hospital, I think it was called.
Yeah, and Alder Hey.
Alder Hey.
Mm-hmm.
And then we came back to Iowa City, where he was on faculty for the rest of his career. Grew up there, swore I didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps. And I was looking at all kinds of state institutions because pediatric surgeons didn't make enough money for me to go to where I wanted to go. And midway through the fall of my senior year, a friend of my dad's, who was a general surgeon in Victoria, British Columbia, came through town and said, well, have you thought of UVic? Well, never having heard of it before, I had not thought of it, but applied and was accepted, much to my surprise. And the concept during the Vietnam War of going to Canada on an island near the mountains coming from Iowa City, Iowa, just sounded too good to pass up. And then I received word that, in fact, the tuition was $423 a year. And after the first year of undergraduate school, I did well enough that I got a full ride scholarship the rest of my time. So my parents spent $423 on my undergraduate tuition.
It's not bad.
Midway through my 3rd year, I loved biology, but I realized I was headed toward being a high school biology teacher, or I had to think of plan B. So I took the MCATs and did well and was accepted to Iowa for medical school. Early acceptance. So, I was told at UVic that after my first year, I would receive enough credits to get my degree. But midway through the first year, I received a letter from UVic saying, oh, we miscalculated. In fact, you'll have to come back here for another semester of school to get a degree. So my CV up until the present time says undergraduate degree none received, which is always a little embarrassing when I'm a visiting professor. So anyway, and I swore I would never be a surgeon until my first day of the surgical clerkship and realized that I had to be a surgeon. Did my general surgery residency at the University of Utah, where Frank Moody was the chair and John Hunter was a year behind me. And they had a bunch of really good GI surgeons there, including Bing Rickers and Jim Becker and others like that. And in fact, I decided that's what I wanted to be and went to the Mayo Clinic for 2 years of research with
Yep.
Keith Kelly in GI motility.
Now, what year was that?
I was there in the GI unit from 1986 to 88.
Okay. All right.
And
Now, that was when Keith was doing gastric pacing and
we were
with
doing
Sid
gastric
Phillips.
pacing and investigating the ileal brake and things that they worked with Sid Phillips. And I mean, it was an incredible period. And Mike Saar was another one of my mentors there.
Yeah.
And the plan had been to go back to Salt Lake and join Jim Becker on faculty, but after my first year, he went to Wash U and then recruited me there. So my first job was at Wash U, where I was hired to do maximally invasive surgery and basic science research and we were doing this research on trying to ablate gallstones in various ways, and in that very short window of the gallbladder lithotripsy, I headed up the Barnes Hospital Gallbladder Center, and I was lecturing in Columbia, Missouri, in 4 months after I went on faculty. And a nurse came up to me after my talk and showed me Laser Monthly News, a publication I'm sure everybody reads. And it was actually the first publication of the first 2 patients treated with laparoscopic laser cholecystectomy by Eddie Joe Reddick.
Yeah.
And I thought that sounds like a much better idea than trying gallstone lithotripsy. So I ended up jumping into it with both feet and did a bunch of animals and worked with the gynecologists and ultimately went down to watch Eddie Joe and Doug Olson do some lap choles and knew that was going to be the future. And so tried to buy the equipment from Carl Storz, and they didn't have any sets for sale right then. So I had to wait until my set was displayed at the American College of Surgeons meeting in 1989 in Atlanta. And so 2 weeks after the ACS meeting, I did my first lap chole in 89, and I guess the rest is history. Yeah.
So let me cherry pick a few items along that way, which has a distressing similarity to my own career path. So first of all, so you said you had never planned to be a surgeon in the early days, et cetera, et cetera. And, one of the things I sometimes ask people, who was their hero, who was their idol, was, where did your dad sit in all of that? I mean, there he was, a pediatric surgeon, was in the 70s. Was he your hero or was he your anti-hero?
Well, he was my hero in many ways, but in that period of time, it wasn't cool to follow in footsteps.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to rebel against those sort of things.
Yeah.
He had been in the Navy and had a butch haircut, and he didn't like my hair down to the shoulders, and a few little things like that.
Sure, normal stuff in the growing up phase, etc. And it's interesting you said about the lithotripsy. About exactly the same time, I spent 2 years doing gallstone lithotripsy. My research fellow was I don't know whatever happened to him. A guy called Ara Darzi.
I know Ara. So where were you when this was going on?
Well, quite bizarrely, I had returned to Dublin to complete my surgical training, and 1986, and my boss, and this was a colorectal job, said to me, so, oh, by the way, you've done research, because I'd done a couple of years of research. He said, I've inherited this research fellow. He said, but I don't know what to do with him. He said, go down and find him. He's playing with a lithotripter. And, I I don't feel sheepish about telling this story about Eric because he's done pretty well for himself. To
Done
be
all right.
fair,
Yeah.
but I go down and I find this room. I open the door and it's in pitch dark, apart from two things that you can see. One is the little tiny ultrasound screen, um, and you could hear this clicking noise going on, but you couldn't
Oh,
see
I
anything.
remember that clicking
Yeah.
noise.
And the other thing you could see was the unmistakable orange glow of a cigarette. So, so Arrow was in there, lithotripting the gallstones in this lady who was lying on the table while he was having a sneaky Marlboro cigarette every time. And so, we met, we became friends. I've been friends with him ever since. And for a time, like we were stars of stage and screen talking about lithotripsy of gallstones. And then Eddie Joe comes along and, picks up the story from, a couple of French guys and starts doing it. And a bit like you, I heard about this, I read about it, and I have to say, in my mind, I couldn't understand how they did this. So I got in a plane. I was working in England at this time,
Uh-huh.
and at Imperial College, where I brought Ara over ultimately. But I got in a plane. I went to Dublin to see a guy who was doing it. Went into the OR with him. I saw him do it, and I went, "That's how they do it."
Isn't that the truth?
And I got back in a plane, and I said, "Okay, what I want is a nice, thin female patient with a simple biliary colic, nothing nasty." Spent about a month, corralling the instruments because I had done laparoscopy in the mid 80s, diagnostic stuff under local. And I found the perfect patient, laparoscoped her. The thing was like concrete.
Yeah. The first one I did had been waiting for me to get the
Yeah,
set and
yeah,
had an empyema of the
sure.
gallbladder. It took me 4 hours.
And we went from there. And, a year into this, Ara and myself said, listen, we're in an academic center. We can't compete with the private practice guys who were doing hundreds of gallbladders. What are we going to do? And we decided to take the appendix out, see if we could do them all laparoscopically. And we did that for a year. We actually had a bet with a guy that we could do it. And at the end of the year, I spent about 2 hours one day trying to find the appendix in a kid, perforated retrocecal appendix. And I remember saying to Ara, you could take this guy's colon out doing this. And he said, yeah, well, why don't we do it next Monday? And so we did. And that was the first lap colectomy in the UK. And we had no idea what we were doing, really. We just,
Well,
you were dependent on people having the right standards, if you like, to not do crazy stuff.
yeah, exactly. And we had good training in open
Yeah.
surgery and knew the planes and things like that. But it was getting accustomed to the instrumentation and the magnification. That's the other thing with the lap choles. I mean, we'd see this one drop of blood and think the patient was exsanguinating.
Yeah, and the thing that I realized suddenly that I had as a head start over most people because of what I'd done as a resident. I knew how to put the ports in.
Yeah.
That was a big deal for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah. Well, in my
yeah,
residency, there was only one guy who did diagnostic laparoscopy, and we all thought he was crazy.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we drew straws to see who wouldn't go into the operating room with him. So that had been my experience.
Well, I always tell, we used to do them under local for like ascites and stuff like that, and you get the person to cough on 3 for the various needle, etc., etc. And the one thing I always tell people is whatever you do when you're doing a true cut biopsy under local anesthetic, laparoscopically, don't forget to give local in the skin for the true cut.
Good point.
Yeah, I did learn that, or I should say the patient learned that, but the hard way.
Yep,
Here you
absolutely.
are in Wash U, being doubtless looked at slightly askance by a few people, wondering what is this guy doing here?
Yep.
Did
Well,
you?
especially, I mean, Sam Wells was chair,
Yeah,
very much a basic science kind of research guy. And
yeah,
I abandoned my basic science research, and initially he wasn't too happy about that.
yeah,
But I convinced him that this was going to be the future of much of surgery in the abdomen. And in his favor, he then supported me 100%. And so I cannot complain. And we were able to get a bunch of money from industry to help support stuff. I never made a penny myself, but was able to fund a fellow and a lot of pigs. And, that was back in the day where you could do, 10 small bowel resections and anastomoses in a pig and present it at SAGES and publish it. And we had engineers from the companies, watching what we do and help develop clip appliers and staplers
yeah,
and all kinds of stuff. And nothing's named after me, and I never made a penny, but it was a lot of fun.
yeah. I mean, it's as Jeff Ponsky always says every time he arrives home, his wife said, "You should have patented the peg tube."
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so your next move was to the big smoke?
To so the next move was to Northwestern.
Yeah,
Yeah, in Chicago, where I ended up was recruited to be a vice chair of clinical affairs and chief of kind of general surgery, and to really get their simulation center rolling. And shortly, about a year and a half after I arrived, the chair at that time, Dick Bell, left to take a job at the American Board of Surgery.
yeah.
And I was named interim chair, and a year later was named permanent chair. Well, not permanent, but
As permanent as a
given the
chair.
title.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as permanent as a chair ever can be.
exactly.
Did you, when you were, working your way through bunches of pigs in WashU, I mean, did you have a burning ambition to be a chair?
I did not. I did not. Um, but I'd had some experience with leaders coming in above me with whom I did not see eye to eye, and realized what implications that could have. And so when the opportunity came to apply for this position, I weighed those things, thinking that, yes, I believe I could do the job. And did I want to risk somebody else with a very different set of priorities coming in and telling me what to do?
Yeah, it's a fairly well trodden path. The combination of a self protective entity of saying I don't want anyone else to do it, and the arrogance of saying I can do it. It's a combination. I mean, many people tell that story. And so you were 12 years chair.
I was 12 years chair at Northwestern. Yeah.
Were
And then
you?
one of those events happened where somebody comes in above you and things changed.
Yeah, I was 15 years a chair, and same story. So I'll ask you the question that I asked myself afterwards. Were you a good chair?
Um, I believe I was a better than average chair. Um, we actually did a lot. We grew tremendously in the faculty. We went from 54th in NIH funding to 10th in the country during my tenure. we became much more of an academic department of surgery and had a really strong surgical residency. So I was overall happy with what we had done.
Yeah, I say to people that, I was 15 years a chair, and I think I was a pretty good chair for 12 of them. Um, and it wasn't necessarily the last three, but I've always interested in how individuals sustain their excellence or their effort or whatever it might be. And it's just a reality, in my opinion.
Yep.
I don't care how famous you are, you're not always on the top of your game.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Did you
There are
sense that?
yes, absolutely. Not only that, but the job of a chair very much goes up and down in terms of your engagement, depending on what you're doing. The fun part of being a chair is building something
Yeah,
and developing things. And when the finances are okay and you can do that, and when you're successful at recruiting, that is fun. I mean, that is the best.
yeah,
But if the budget's not so good, or you have some problematic people and division chiefs below you that are causing trouble, or the people acting out that you have to discipline, then that is no fun at all.
yeah, yeah. In a sustained period of 25 years, I made three bad recruits. Um, well, obviously, no names, of course.
Of course.
But those three bad recruits, I ran the risk that those three bad recruits defined me because they sucked so much oxygen out of the process.
Absolutely.
Um, uh, is that something that resonates with you?
Absolutely.
Mm.
You know, a bad apple does spoil the bunch. And not only that, it sucks so much of your time away and your emotional energy. And, you have to go through all the processes in order to try to do something about it. And sometimes those are foiled by various regulations, in HR or whatever in your institution. So, I sent a number of people to coaching, and I would say I think 5 people I sent to coaching, one was actually rehabilitated, and the other 4 just kept doing exactly what they were doing before.
I asked a very good friend of mine, I won't name him, but he was chair of surgery. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he had a problem with a heart surgeon who had punched a perfusionist, which is, not very smart for a heart surgeon to do that. And shall we say it was not his first encounter with authority. And I said, what did you do with him? And he said, well, he sent him on a 6-week residential rehab thing at his own cost. And I said, well, what happened then? He says, he's back at work. He's been back at work for the last year. And I said, well, did it change him? And he said, no, not at all. He said, but he hasn't punched a perfusionist since he's back. And I came to the understanding that's the best I could hope for.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
people are people, I guess, etc.
Yeah, and often by the age of being an attending surgeon, their personality is pretty much set, and there's
Yeah.
not much you're going to be able to do about it.
No, no, no. Uh, um, there is that famous aphorism that, when you're a leader, a third of people love you, a third of people hate you, and a third of people don't care. And I think that's probably reasonable. Were you somebody who fretted over being loved or not?
I didn't fret over it, but I must say I wanted people not to love me necessarily, but to like me and think that I was a kind human being.
And did you struggle with the opposite? Did it distress you if you realize suddenly that somebody has been saying bad things about you? Because that always happens.
Yeah, it bothered me, yes.
Yeah.
And would try to bring that person into the office and talk things through. My guess is that never changed that person's feelings about me, but we all want to be loved, and we know if you want to be loved, you get a dog,
Yeah.
and so I've always had dogs, but no, I think it's a natural human condition to want to be liked and to want the people who report up to you to think you're doing a good job and are a reasonable person.
So you alluded to the fact that 12 years in, there was what we can call a geopolitical shift.
Yes.
Um, and so suddenly this Midwestern boy is kicking dust around in the desert.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me about that experience.
Well, I hung around at Northwestern for another year and a half because I was also program director and I did not want to desert the ship right away and wanted there to be some continuity and appointed a new program director and or recruited another program director from within the ranks so I could feel more comfortable that the place wouldn't have major upheaval. Um, and then it's funny because my previous chief of transplant surgery at Northwestern, a guy by the name of Mike Abacassis, had taken the job as dean of the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson,
Yeah.
and called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, they're looking for a new chair of surgery at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix. Would you even consider this?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And 2 weeks later, I got a call from another guy who was actually the leader of the physician part of
Yeah.
both medical schools, who I had worked with previously at Northwestern, and he said, "Nat, I really think you should think about this job. It's a startup academic medical center. We think that you could have a positive impact here, um, and um, and this would be a good place for you to, think about kind of finishing your career over the next X number of years." And I thought about it, and I talked to my wife about it, and we had no kids at home at that point, and it sounded like something that might be interesting and exciting. And so I ended up coming and visiting and talking to a bunch of people. And my main question was, does the leadership get along? And is there a common purpose of the people here? And my sense was that yes, that was the case, and there was a lot of optimism about what could be done here. Um, I had both at WashU and at Northwestern when I'd been there. They both moved from being primarily private practice to primarily employed academics over, a 10-year period of time. This place was largely private practice for many years, and now it is part of that evolution into more of an academic mindset. And it's a new College of Medicine, and we have a bunch of new chairs who've been recruited who are from academic institutions. And I think we're all kind of pulling together now to see if we can't really develop something special here in the desert.
Oops. That was just me. When you left Chicago, I mean, that wasn't plan A, obviously. You hung around for a year and a half, as you say, following. Um, did you deal with that easily? Did you, everybody says never look back and all of that sort of stuff, but it's easier said than done,
Oh, yeah.
because, you've basically uprooted your family and yourself from in a way that you didn't have any plans, and the natural sense is, it's not my fault. I didn't, did you, how did you deal with that? Was that easy to deal with, or did you, you're a golfer, I know. And I
It was,
remember Doug Sanders. If you remember Doug Sanders,
yeah.
Somebody said to him, you missed the playoff in the British Open by an 18-inch putt. He says, does it bother you? And he said, no, not at all. He said, some days I go an hour without thinking of it.
Yeah, no, it was it was hard at first. Um, Certainly, it was disappointing. It was unexpected. Came out of the blue, and and sudden. So the dean called me into his office and said, "I want your letter of resignation by 5 o'clock tonight." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I don't need a reason why." And then
Nice.
he called an emergency meeting of the faculty for the following morning to let them know that I had resigned. And so I started getting all these texts and phone calls. What do you have, pancreatic cancer? What's going on? And so it was a weird period, where for a period of time I felt as though I was kind of licking my wounds, trying to figure
Yeah.
out what would be the next thing. And I kept saying, and my wife kept saying, well, things happen for a reason, and you wonder what that reason is. And in fact, now, 5 years later or whatever it is, it's not a bad reason.
Did you go through a phase of questioning your abilities? And
Of course, of
yeah,
course,
yeah,
questioning my leadership.
yeah. It's a tough thing to do. Large organizations, are not very good with people,
Right.
general, and it's a tough experience, I think, for anybody. It's actually, let's assume there are individuals for whom that was the correct choice, namely to separate from them. It's tough for them as well. It doesn't really matter. I mean,
Right.
it's still a stressful experience.
It's stressful and humbling, and I mean, there are 100 emotions that this brought up.
Yeah,
And but as with everything else, you get over it and
exactly. Yeah. So
and
now
you
you
move on.
are in the desert, and so far one assumes you have not been bitten by a rattlesnake. Um,
No, haven't been bitten by a rattlesnake. Have lived through the two hottest summers on record here, which most people can't fully understand. But we just passed 110 days of over 100-degree weather this summer so far. Um, and Thankfully, my wife hates the heat, and so we ended up getting a place up in Flagstaff, which is 2-hour drive away and 30
yeah,
degrees cooler. And she's up there from April through November, and I go up on the weekends and hang out with her and the four-legged kids.
yeah. I like Flagstaff. It's nice.
Yeah,
And it's where they used to have one of the headquarters of Gore-Tex.
of Gore. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If I recall. So, not that you're proposing to disappear today or tomorrow, hopefully. What's your view about being remembered? Is that something that interests you? Are you interested in legacy? How do you think people should want to be remembered?
I I want to be remembered as an individual who did have an influence on surgery during my lifetime, during my career. Um, but probably more importantly, that I was upstanding citizen, honest, um, didn't, you know, didn't rip off patients or anything, took good care of patients, and was a kind individual.
Do you think that's changed over the years? As in, have you added more to the latter and eased off the former,
A,
or
a
not?
little bit, yeah. And what's funny is now, at least here, and I think many places in the country, general surgery is going full bore robotics.
Yeah,
And I've made the conscious decision not to do that. And so Next time I'm asked to give grand rounds, the title is going to be Minimally Invasive Surgery, from Revolutionary to Dinosaur in One Career.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
it's amazing how much has changed in the last 35, 36 years.
So it's as though there was a script in front of you. Because one of the things I will ask, I often ask people is, and it seems blindingly obvious in your case, but what has been the biggest change for the better that you've seen? And then, of course, the flip to that question.
Well, I honestly believe that the development of laparoscopy was revolutionary, and I think it did markedly help patients. I think robotics is just another step along the minimally invasive surgery continuum, and I think that there's some really good things about it, but I think we need to balance the cost and the utility, and I think there's some cases that probably shouldn't be done robotically just because of the cost. Certainly I was also involved in some of those clinical forays into natural orifice surgery and things, which was kind of crazy. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, but after doing a few cases in humans, I realized that probably didn't make a lot of sense, except that it got us into intraluminal or intramural surgery, which I think
Yeah.
there's certainly things that can be done best using that technology. Um, I do worry a little bit about the trainees today. We asked one of our graduates a year after he'd graduated and went into private practice to come back and talk about his first year in practice at Grand Rounds. And he talked about, he's a general surgeon. 2/3 of his cases have been robotic. And he talked about a case, he had a tough gallbladder that he couldn't do robotically. So he just stopped the operation and sent him to our hospital for an open cholecystectomy because he didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that.
Yeah.
And we have the advantage of having been brought up in the open era. I'm hoping that the kids today get enough trauma experience and things so they can do that. But it's clear that many of the younger surgeons don't feel comfortable converting to open on cholecystectomies and things.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody, that concern has been articulated for probably 20 plus years.
Since
Um,
the early 90s, we
yeah.
were asked about
Um,
training in open
you
surgery.
know, um, and my experience was that if you converted for a trainee, when it was converted, they knew how to take the gallbladder out. What they did not know how to set up was the setup of an open
Right.
cholecystectomy,
The
which was,
packing and the retractor.
yeah, and who stands there. I mean, it's kind of a set piece dance, with the retractor here and the hand here and the pack there. They had no clue how to do that.
Right.
If you got that for them, then they could take the gallbladder out,
Yep.
which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on the notes. I remember having a conversation with somebody who said to me, "Well, why wouldn't you do this?" I said, I worry greatly about my anastomosis falling apart, in any form of reconstructive surgery. Why would I punch a hole in a perfectly healthy stomach to take a gallbladder out? It's the one thing I'm trying not to do.
Right. Right.
Um, and
Well,
it's,
we
a little Neanderthal, but nonetheless, I think,
well, we punched a few holes in stomachs. We punched a few holes in vaginas, and
yeah, exactly.
thought it was cool, and obviously reported it, and then pretty rapidly said, "This is crazy. I don't know why we ever thought this was a good
Yeah,
idea."
exactly. Yeah. So if a young faculty comes to see you on Monday morning and says, "So, Dr. Soper, you are a man of enormous wisdom and experience, and I'm just starting in my career, and I need to ask you, what is it that really matters?"
What is it that really matters? Well, as a surgeon, um, and I think in an academic center or not, I think that one must be a good technical surgeon. One must care about his patients and their welfare. One must be willing to mentor those below him or her such that they can also achieve those same qualities. And one must help give back to the profession in one way or another so that it can improve. So be that teaching trainees, be that doing some kind of stuff where you push the field forward, be it, they're being it joining the American College of Surgeons and things. I think there are lots of things that we can do for our specialty, and I think it's important we do that.
So those are all laudable aspirations, and I don't disagree with any of them. I strongly agree with them. But as well as I do, there are faculty members walking your hallways and my hallways that don't tick all of those boxes. They may tick 2, they may tick 3. The rare person is the quadruple threat, but so
almost never anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So what is it that really matters?
That's funny. So what I tell all the junior faculty who come to me for advice is they need to take care of themselves. They need to take care of their family and significant others.
Anybody ever tell you that when you were starting out?
Oh, hell no. No. And in fact, my wife still has problems with, how I dealt with family early in my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the younger surgeons aren't willing to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm not happy with that because they're not finishing a chapter or a paper or something. But it's in many ways it's understandable, and the ones who are actually willing to do stuff at night and on the weekends are unicorns.
So you're 60 something now. What's the plan?
What's the plan, Stan?
Yeah.
The plan is when I feel as though I have probably done as much as I can, and probably more importantly, I have recruited a number of very good young faculty that I want to see and feel comfortable that they are on their way to a successful career. It'll be time to go, and that could be in a year or two, and that could be in 5. But given the fact that I've had a number of acquaintances who have had health problems of late, I'm thinking probably sooner rather than later, but I don't want to say on air when that would be.
Yeah, of course. Do you have, amongst the people I've spoken to over the last year and a half, Jeff Matthews was one of the first, and Barry Solke echoed this as well. Do you have somebody where you have a spoken or unspoken deal who'll tap you on the shoulder and say, Nat, it's time?
I don't.
Should
I don't, unless it's my wife.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she's been saying that for years, probably. But should you? Should we? Should we all?
That's an interesting question. If there were somebody near my age, maybe a little bit younger, who I really trusted, then yeah, I could see doing that. Because I've actually pulled back my practice somewhat. So now I'm as I said, I'm the dinosaur. I'm doing open hernia repairs and laparoscopic choles and hernia repairs and stuff. And The chief residents want to operate with me to learn how to do those things, which is really fun. But they're also not terribly complex or time consuming.
Sure.
I think I can do that for a little bit longer without being too worried about my technical skills. If my wife tells me that my mental skills are deteriorating, then that will end that. But I think that's a very fascinating question, and the answer is no, I don't have that person.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you?
I don't. I'm in the same position as you. Jeff's view was that he thinks surgeons should undergo psychomotor and cognitive testing on a regular basis beyond the age of 60 something, whatever you want to choose.
Right.
Barry, who spent like 140 years in Mount Sinai, had a deal with a partner a mutual deal. And he describes it in his interview with me, a mutual deal that they would both agree to say to each other, you might want to. And I interviewed a colleague of mine in England who is a head and neck surgeon. And he's a guy I recruited to be head of head and neck surgery when I was chair there. And he was a young attending helping his mentor, who I knew was a very senior, very well-known guy. And it was the exact opposite. The guy was doing a pharyngeal pouch. And I mean, he describes this in the interview. It was making a bit of a mess of it. And, the young guy says to him, would you like me to take over? And he said, to his enormous credit, he said, "Oh, would you? That would, thank you. Would you?" Because as he said, his great skill at that moment was the recognition that he wasn't doing a good job.
Yeah.
And that's, we've all seen the opposite to that.
Absolutely.
So.
And that would be horrible to have that be ultimately your legacy, is that you stayed on too long and screwed up.
Yeah, wouldn't be the first time that you know that. So let's I don't want to finish our conversation on a sort of a sadish note. So I'm going to ask you some much more searching questions. These are very brief questions and equally brief answers, but they are sometimes what matters in life. What's your favorite movie?
What is my favorite movie? Oh my goodness.
There's several of these, by the way. So
yeah, that is a hard one. So I would say Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Oh wow, Alec Guinness and
Oh,
the
yeah.
whole gang. Okay. What's the best book you ever read?
The Lord of the Rings.
I've never read that book.
That's terrible. I was reading it aloud to my grandson last week.
I've never read it. And I've never seen Harry Potter movies.
I haven't either.
Favorite food?
I would say I'm an Iowa boy, so I'd say a good ribeye steak.
Okay. Do you have any animal phobias?
No,
No scariest animal?
not really.
What happens when we die?
I believe that your spirit does leave your body and goes somewhere. It's here in the ethos somewhere, and I fully believe that that spirit is kept alive by others remembering them.
Have you ever asked anyone for an autograph?
No.
There's time. Who would it be?
Who would I would have said Willie Mays, but he just passed.
He did. Too late. Yeah.
So who, having been in Chicago, Michael Jordan's would be a good one.
Okay. And last question is it's Friday night tonight. You have a dinner at home, you organize, and you suddenly discover you have two spare seats at the table for dinner guests, and you can invite anyone from history, dead or alive. Who is that couple or pair of individuals that you invite?
Well, because my wife would be at the dinner table with me, it would be the Obamas.
Ah, and that would get you brownie points.
That would get me brownie points, and I think it would be fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. I interviewed Tom Varghese recently. He said he wanted to invite Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi. I said, the only worry about that would be if a fight broke out,
Yes.
between the two pacifists. Well, listen, Nat, I really am appreciative. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I hope other people will find it fascinating, and I really appreciate you being so willing to chat about the ups and downs of a career. I think it's important for people to tell the truth about stuff sometimes,
Absolutely.
because it's there in everybody's life. So I really appreciate your time. Thank
Well,
you so much.
John, I appreciate you asking me to be involved. And if you could send me a link to the podcast or whatever, that would be great.
100%. I'll do that.
Okay. Well, the
So
best of luck to you.
thank you.